Well, hello, I'm Josh and I'm back once again with another great film to tell you about. It's another silent film today, but this time it's a silent comedy. I'm talking about Harold Lloyd's 1925 classic, The Freshman. The Freshman follows Harold Lamb, who goes by the name Speedy, as he sets off for his first year in college. In preparation, Harold has been watching movies, memorizing the school yells, and studying last year's yearbook to learn all he needs to know to become the most popular kid in school. The only problem being, Harold is a bit too eager to fit in, and whether it be his goofy handshake or a mix-up in transportation, he just gets knocked down and fails at everything he tries, making him the laughingstock of the entire campus. But with the help of his friend Peggy, Harold learns to be himself and to never give up as he joins the school's football team in hopes of winning their big game. Now, Harold Lloyd is a really interesting figure in this silent era of American movies. Though nowadays he's mostly overshadowed by his bigger contemporaries like Charlie Chaplin and Buster Keaton, Lloyd was still able to make a pretty big name for himself in his own right. Though his first major character was an admitted knockoff of Chaplin's little tramp by the name of Lonesome Luke, he really gained popularity with what he called the Glasses character. And this character, though he had many last names, was almost always named Harold. And one of the ways he stood out from Chaplin or Keaton was that Harold Lloyd didn't grow out of vaudeville. He started his comedy career specifically in film, and while Chaplin was almost clown-like in his unusual but iconic appearance, and Keaton played up his expressionless stone-face routine, Lloyd's Glasses character was meant to resemble more of an average person. And though the glasses helped give him an iconic and somewhat silly appearance, they also helped him look less like the handsome movie stars that people were so used to seeing in the theaters, and more like someone they might actually run into out on the street. And the huge success of his character showed that comedians didn't have to make themselves look goofy or dress like a clown to be funny. An important thing to note, though I keep referring to this as a Harold Lloyd film, it was not directed by Lloyd and was actually done by Newmeyer and Sam Taylor. And they were both actually part of the gag team that Harold Lloyd worked with to come up with jokes for his films. And this is not to say that they didn't actually direct the films, but if you watch them all together, especially from this period in the 20s, they have this distinct style to them, and yet they still feel very consistent between each other, despite having different quote directors from film to film. And this is largely because, as Lloyd described it, they were really all involved in the filmmaking and the joke writing together. And so it wouldn't really be easy to accurately credit one person with a singular job. And Lloyd often insisted on not including himself in most of the credits to allow for the others to build up their own writing and directing careers. I mean, Delmer Daves, for example, director of classic films such as the original 3:10 to Yuma, actually got his start as a gag man for Harold Lloyd. And one of the things I really love about Harold Lloyd's films in particular is just how well they capture and document the times they were filmed in. And though it of course is a somewhat heightened and comedic version of reality, most of these films were shot on location rather than in a studio, and so you can really get a glimpse of what life looked like for people in the 1920s. And as films like Safety Last, For Heaven's Sake, and Speedy did for city life, The Freshman shows a pretty encompassing image of what it looked like to go to college back in the day. It's just such an interesting thing to be able to really see how people dressed, what technology they used, what they did for fun, and even see their sense of humor. And despite the age, the film still holds up really well today. I think part of that is due to the fact that overall, Harold Lloyd's films just feel a bit more cinematic than many of his other contemporaries. Now I know for most people, if you were to think of a silent film, chances are you'd picture a kind of jittery image that's really wide, pulled out so that nobody gets left out of the frame, seldomly cutting to close-ups. Techniques that worked well enough back in the day, but now that we're 100 plus years later, feel kind of a slog to get through. And this is sort of the picture most people seem to get when they think of silent films, and though that does describe certainly a number of them, it is far from an accurate representation of the whole period. I've covered a number of great silent films on this channel, so you may already have a bit of an idea of what I mean, but over the past month or two watching and researching his work, I found that Harold Lloyd's films really do a great job of showing what filmmakers in these times were capable of. His films move lightning fast, playing joke after joke, honestly outpacing a good amount of modern comedies. And these jokes are often really well thought out too. Lloyd's films are full of movement and action, especially when he got into his stunt period of films like Girl Shy, Safety Last, and For Heaven's Sake, which have been often referenced and recreated by more modern filmmakers like Jackie Chan. But watching any of Lloyd's films, you're definitely going to see a clear vision with an eye for visual comedy, as well as a great attention to detail. Practically everything you see is either a setup or a payoff to a gag, and there's always plenty of background jokes and puns to make the films worth rewatching. But what separates The Freshman from a number of other Lloyd pictures is that this one is much more story-centric. All of Lloyd's previous films were mostly constructed around the gags and bigger set pieces, while the story was more or less made up on the fly. And though the idea of this film was based around the set piece of Lloyd and his team wanting to do a football movie, Lloyd wanted to create a solid enough backstory to give the audience reason enough to care about the character. And this really made a difference in the film. Not only is it a hilarious comedy, but it also has a lot of heart to it as well, with the message behind it about the importance of being yourself. We may not all be the most popular kid in school, but with a bit of confidence and a lot of perseverance, everyone can use their given talents to find success in their own way. And that's a big part of what I enjoy in Harold Lloyd's movies. Whatever his goal is, he just keeps fighting and fighting for it, no matter how big the setbacks may be. If he gets knocked down, he just gets right back up and keeps going. So when he finally does start to win, the crowd is fully behind him. And that football scene at the end is fantastic, by the way. And a fun fact is the shots where you can see the crowd were all captured during the halftime of an actual game in the California Memorial Stadium. And some of the others were shot in the Rose Bowl as well. So it's really cool to get a peek into what these big stadiums looked like 100 years ago. And believe me, things have changed quite a bit since then. I mean, with that padding, who knows how many concussions Lloyd would have gotten if that game had been for real. And another thing to mention, the title cards in this film are really funny. A lot of these were apparently written by a guy named Beanie Walker, who was a reporter for the Los Angeles Examiner, and he just had a great way with words, making each one of them very clever if not completely hilarious. And even though there might not be a soundtrack aside from the music, one thing that you may notice is that Lloyd still incorporated sound-paced gags into his films. For instance, this one in the party where Harold Taylor uses the sound of a bell as a signal in case his suit tears, only he discovers that everyone's table has a bell, and so he hears everyone else's bell but ignores his own. And since this didn't have a synced soundtrack, the producers actually had to give notes to the theater's organists to either ring a bell or play a specific note at these moments in the film. And so I just find it fascinating that they were still trying to incorporate sound gags despite having no synchronized audio with the film. And though Lloyd wasn't the only one to do this in the silent days, he certainly seemed to do it more than most. And though nowadays he's not quite as well remembered as some of his peers, I wouldn't feel too bad for Harold Lloyd. In his day, he was actually the leading silent film comic in terms of output and outperformed both Buster Keaton and Charlie Chaplin in yearly box office returns during much of the 20s. And in doing so, he actually became one of the richest men in Hollywood. And with this massive amount of popularity Lloyd had obtained, you would think that he would have had a hard time going out in public. I mean, we've seen how big crowds for celebrities can be, but Lloyd's glasses actually gave him an advantage that many of the other celebrities didn't, in that he was nearly unrecognizable without them. And seeing that the glasses weren't actually prescription ones, Lloyd was able to take them off and walk freely about without anyone being the wiser, almost like a reverse Superman. Interestingly enough, the creators of Superman, Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, actually based Superman's glasses disguised alter ego, Clark Kent, on Harold Lloyd. And when you look at his frames in the comics, they actually line up pretty well. Another interesting connection is that actor Cary Grant claimed to have based his performance in the Howard Hawks comedy Bringing Up Baby on Harold Lloyd, even down to wearing the same style of glasses. And close to 50 years after that, Superman actor Christopher Reeve said that he based his performance as the clumsy Clark Kent on Cary Grant's character from Bringing Up Baby. So I guess really no matter which way you put it, Harold Lloyd is pretty much Superman. And another interesting fact about the legacy of specifically this film, The Freshman, that a lot of people don't know about, but there was actually a sequel to it made 20 years later by the great writer and director Preston Sturges called The Sin of Harold Diddleduck. Sturges apparently was a huge Harold Lloyd fan and loved The Freshman, so when Lloyd proposed that they made a film together, Sturges said that he wanted to do one that started directly after The Freshman and show what happened to Harold after the big game. And the film actually uses scenes from The Freshman, flawlessly intercut with a 50-year-old Lloyd who somehow still looked like he was in college. Sadly, you likely haven't heard of this film for a reason, as it was a pretty big bomb upon its release and wasn't anything close to the great Lloyd comeback film that either of them were hoping for. But regardless, it's still pretty neat to see Lloyd interacting with Sturges' regular cast of character actors, and makes for a curious little discovery despite paling in comparison to the film and career that it pays tribute to. Now to talk about the actors, Harold Lloyd is of course great in this. He just had a fantastic way of being expressive without being completely clownish, if you know what I mean. He doesn't ever feel too over the top, which I think really helps his films hold up after all these years. In fact, he comes across quite natural while still giving enough expression for the comedy. Maybe partially because he never worked on the stage and only got his start in films, he is much more prone to work in subtle movements and expression rather than go big so the people in the back row can still see. I think especially by this point in his career, he knew the power a film had to move in and show the details we normally couldn't see on stage, and so he would take full advantage of it. In fact, when re-releasing this film in the 50s or 60s, Lloyd actually took out some of these scenes, including this crying scene in which he felt it was too melodramatic. And though the specific moment could be seen that way, I think it's actually quite earned given the context and the lead up to it, in which Lloyd tries to shrug off the bullying despite how hurt he clearly was by it. As funny as it's been to see Harold be so oblivious and optimistic despite his peers attempting to put him down, actually seeing this wave of emotion from Harold hits surprisingly hard, especially as this is coming from a comedic character that we have come to root for. But what really clenches the emotion is when we go back to his dorm to see the cutout article of himself that he so excitingly posts on his wall next to the one of the most popular kid in school. He raises and lowers it throughout the story in relation to his own perceived popularity, but when the revelation comes that it was all a joke at his expense, we see the paper float slowly down and land in the trash. A simple shot that, given the context, just adds that perfect end to the scene, while also pushing the emotions Harold had been creating much higher than he could have ever done with his performance alone. And another notable actor in this film is Jobyna Noble, who actually made a number of films with Lloyd. After marrying his leading lady from Safety Last, Mildred Davis, Lloyd didn't think audiences would be as entertained if he kept meeting and marrying his actual wife in all of his movies. So he ended up finding Jobyna Noble, who went on to co-star in all of his films up to The Kid Brother, until she ended up getting a prominent role in the first Oscar winner for Best Picture, Wings, which you can actually see on the theater marquee in Lloyd's first film without her, Speedy. But she does a fantastic job and really has a great role in the story, much more interesting than a number of the usual leading lady roles given in those days, and she plays it very well. Once again, much like Lloyd, she gives a pretty natural performance that never really feels like she's ever overselling. So if you'd like to see The Freshman, you are in luck because the film is pretty easy to get almost anywhere you look. Since it's almost 100 years old, it's in the public domain, though as I've said in the past, even though it's available everywhere, quality can kind of vary depending on where you find it. And as you see here, I have the film from the Criterion Collection, I know, big surprise. And you can actually stream this high definition transfer from places like HBO Max and the Criterion channel, but if you get it physically, it actually comes with it on both Blu-ray and DVD, as well as some great bonus features, shorts, and a fantastic commentary track on the film, which I actually found pretty fun to listen to. Since it's a silent film, you can still follow along with the plot pretty easily with the commentary track on, and since it's a comedy, you don't have quite the droll history and scene analysis that might normally keep you away from a commentary track. But enough of that, now it's time for the comment question, and I'm wondering, what is your favorite silent comedy? I know I've been going off about Harold Lloyd, but it doesn't necessarily have to be a Lloyd film. Both Charlie Chaplin and Buster Keaton have some fantastic films out there. Or maybe you just want to dig even deeper with some Fatty Arbuckle films or some Little Rascal shorts, I don't know. Just put your favorites in the comment section down below and start discussing. Hit the like button if you enjoyed this video and subscribe if you want to see more. Just remember to keep watching movies and I'll see you again soon.